Team, welcome to this Selenium 3.0 plus the continuous integration and continuous deployment tools orientation session. If you're just wondering what is the CI/CD in all the invite that I have sent, it's nothing but the continuous integration and continuous deployment that the industry, along with the agile methodology, is trying to adapt. So most of the organizations are strive towards the continuous integration and continuous deployment, where they want to have daily, builds to happen, so that daily automation regression can run, and you confirm the corresponding build whether it is, whether you want to give a sign off or not, so that it will go for the user acceptance testing. So there are a lot of tools that we are going to look at along with the Selenium main automation testing tool. So it's not just about the Selenium, it's Selenium plus a lot of tools, just to name them. So definitely within the Selenium itself, we are going to see the different set of suites. But apart from that, we are going to see the Apache Maven tool for the build management, Jenkins tool for the continuous integration. Before even that, we are going to maintain all the source code into Git and GitHub, which is the central repository. And we'll also look at a couple of other things like behavior-driven development tools like Cucumber, because a lot of people, after understanding the overall Selenium and worked with Selenium and various components of it, they are also extending their test cases to the test-driven development model, acceptance test-driven development model, behavior-driven development model, etc., using the tools like Cucumber, Java, and the Selenium. So we'll look at that tool as well, part of this. And then there is one important framework which is developed on top of Selenium 2.0. So Selenium, something we're going to look at, a detailed introduction about it in today's session. It is so flexible and can be extended. People can actually develop frameworks on top of the Selenium. One good example is the robot framework that is available in the market. So people are actually using this Selenium 2.0, and they have extended it to robot framework. So it's not just about the Selenium that I'm going to talk about. So within the Selenium suite itself, we're going to look at Selenium IDE, we're going to look at WebDriver, we're going to look at JUnit for the unit testing, TestNG for the functional framework. We're going to various frameworks that we're going to look at, like data-driven framework. We're going to look at keyword-driven framework development. Along with this, we're going to look at a couple of other tools as well. So one is definitely the Selenium Grid is one of them. So definitely Grid is one of the major component. A page object model is one of them. And then we'll look at various other automation parts of it. So it's not just about the Selenium 3.0 that we are talking about. The latest one is the 3.0. I'm going to look at, I'm going to show you in a couple of minutes the latest version from where you can download and all. But we just to talk about it, Selenium 3.0 suite, which includes all these components. And then we're going to look at the Git and GitHub as part of the detailed discussion. Then we're going to look at the Apache Maven, which is typically for build management, and the jar file management for Java. Whereas Jenkins is the main thing that is used for the continuous integration and continuous deployment. So after mastering our Selenium automation, you will be developing certain framework. We will be looking at as part of this, like keyword driven framework or hybrid driven framework or a page object model framework, and that you can schedule within the Jenkins on a particular time on a day-to-day basis. So it will automatically trigger it out on the need basis whenever the build has been generated. So it's majorly all these components is what we're going to learn as part of this this thing. So if you have to quickly try to understand what exactly the Selenium tool is all about, and the WebDriver tool is all about, so it's typically it's an open source. The biggest advantage of this is it's basically an open source. It's majorly used for functional testing automation. So the main purpose of this tool is for functional testing automation of web-based applications. So it's mainly for web-based applications. So currently, most of the applications that we have, or majority of them, are web-based compared to the typical Windows-based applications. And of course, on the other side, we have the mobile applications. But if you just keep that aside, of course, even mobile applications can be automated using the Appium library with the Selenium. So if you just keep that aside, majority of the portion is web-based applications. So almost it can be developed in any language, be it related to a Microsoft-based technology, web-based application developed in any technology. So that's not a criteria. It can be PHP, it can be HTML, it can be Java, or it can be any of the Microsoft technology. So whatever it is your application, so basically we're going to use Selenium or Selenium WebDriver for automating the functional testing of the application. And it's typically an open source, so it's freely available. Anybody can use it. A lot of startups, midware companies, multinational companies, most of the high-end product-based companies are actually using Selenium. So if you just wanted to go a little bit more details about it, you can go through the seleniumhq.org website a little bit later. So this is the official website from where we are going to pick up all the required components, all the suite of components that we are going to work with, like Selenium WebDriver, Selenium IDE, and most of the things you can find it under download. So as you can see, the latest version as of today is 3.7.1. So this is the latest version, and it can actually the next important thing that I'm going to talk about is the languages it is going to support. So if you see most of the automation tools, right, so typically they work on the principle of recording and playback. Apart from recording and playback, you can also write your own, basically you can write the program on your own if you once you become the master of the corresponding tool. So when it comes to automation, for example, if you're all familiar with HP UFT, it will use a language like VB script, or you can even use JavaScript to automate it, right? Similarly, if you're just wondering what is a tool that is used by Selenium can actually use any of these languages. We can write the code in Java, C Sharp, Ruby, Python, or you can write it in JavaScript, etc. So, like any other automation, it it can record and play back the test or play back your test scripts. So in majorly Selenium, there is a component called an IDE through which you can do all these things, recording and playback. But when it comes to WebDriver, so the next component that we have is like WebDriver. So here purely you're going to write the code in one of these languages. So WebDriver, we can use any language like Java, or you can use C Sharp, or you can use Python, or you can use Ruby, etc. So corresponding to those, the language bindings are available here. Based on the language that we're going to look at, we will be downloading these language bindings and adding it to the integrated development environment tool that you're going to work. So typically in case of Java, we're going to use Eclipse IDE. You can also use another IDE called IntelliJ, but compared to one of them is fine, either Eclipse IDE or IntelliJ IDE. And if you're going to use C Sharp, obviously you're going to use Visual Studio. And similarly for Python, you're going to use like PyDev, etc. So there are different development environment tools that you're going to use for writing the script, and you will be automating your test cases in the corresponding language, in any of these language. So most of our discussion for the detailed sessions, we're going to majorly look at in Java language. Almost 80% of the discussions we're going to make it on Java language, but I will be definitely discussing it on how you can actually do it on Python or Ruby The IDE has a latest feature in 3.0, something called where you can export your programs into different languages, through which we can definitely look at some of the syntaxes on C Sharp, Python, Ruby, etc. So if you have to just look at the little bit of more detailed about what is this tool and kind of who developed it, etc. So like any other automation, it's majorly for regression testing. So when you have set of test cases and whenever there is a major change that happens, so you're going to repeatedly do some testing. So that is like your impacted areas testing, which is regression testing. And this can work on different browsers. So it can actually work on different browsers like that it can support. To start with, we'll be looking at it on Firefox, which was the default browser when Selenium IDE got started developing it the first time. I'll kind of give you when was the first version of it got released and how it went through major versions of it. So Firefox is the default browser that works with Selenium, but apart from that, you can definitely use Google Chrome, you can use Safari, you can use Internet Explorer, you can use Edge browser. Again, you can see all that information from here, seleniumhq.org download. If you go there, you can find all third-party browser drivers. Okay, so these are not developed by Selenium HQ, but typically they come from different organizations, right? So right now you don't see the Internet Explorer here, but we'll be definitely looking at Internet Explorer and Edge as well. But otherwise you have Google Chrome, Mozilla Gecko driver is something related to Firefox. Then you have Opera browser, HTML unit driver. So the way it actually works is Selenium, even though like say, so typically the way we're going to write it is you will have a development environment in which you're going to write the program, and we're going to use an interface which is called WebDriver interface, which will convert these corresponding programming languages, instructions that you're going to write in Java or Ruby or Python, to playback it on the expected browser. Maybe the browser is Firefox, or maybe the browser is Internet Explorer. So your WebDriver interface will actually convert the commands that you're going to write and perform the required actions on the web application. At the end of the day, you can think of any web application is typically an HTML application, right? So what can happen is that even though you write using Firefox driver or Gecko driver or Chrome driver, etc., there is internally all the Selenium code is going to be converted into something called HTML unit driver. So there is a default driver. It's like a low-level driver that you can think of, which will be converting into the low-level language that can be understandable by the HTML native language, and it is going to play back. So that's what you can actually see here as HTML unit driver. So everything will be converted into HTML unit driver and then play back. So we'll see all those kind of options to look at there. So just give me 1 second. So that's about the browsers, different browsers that it is going to support, different languages it is going to support. Um, the biggest advantage is like there are different organizations uses different languages. For example, if a project is developed in Java, so you don't need to really, like for example, mostly people try to compare this with HP UFT because that was so popular when Selenium, when people started picking up the Selenium. So there is a natural comparison that happens. Obviously, there are various commercial tools like Microsoft Visual Studio Test Suite is there. We have Rational Robo from IBM is there, Rational Suite. So when compared to all these things, you may be just using one or two languages. For example, HPUFT can only work with a VB script or a JavaScript. But here you have plenty of language options. Whatever the team that you are comfortable, that you can actually start use it. For example, your product is developed in Java, so you have an in-house knowledge of Java development team. So you can actually do an automation also in Java. No, if your product is developed in Microsoft technologies, you have an in-house knowledge of C Sharp, so then people naturally will pick it up Selenium with C Sharp bindings to automate it. So that's how it generally goes. Again, unlike other HPUFT or other tools, it can even support different operating systems, right? So when it comes to the operating systems, whereas your HPUFT actually works only on Windows. I need to check with the latest version, but here you can have it worked on Windows. You can actually do it's just about installing the Eclipse and installing the Java. Then after that, configuring the bindings and start writing the program. So you can actually do it on Windows. You can do it on Mac. You can do it on Linux or Ubuntu, whatever the operating system. So it supports various browsers, supports various operating systems, and different language things that you can do. So if you have to just understand quickly a little bit of history of the Selenium, who developed it, how long this has been there in the market, is it the right tool that I need to pick it up for learning, etc., etc. Some of these questions can be clarified with the very first version of it is actually released in the year of 2004 by a company called ThoughtWorks. So in fact, they developed it only for automating their purpose. It's not really as a commercial or or even open source tool for the market. So they just developed it for their own product, and the developer, major developer, was called somebody. Jason Huggins is the one who majorly involved in developing this first version of the Selenium, which is Selenium 1.0. But frankly speaking, that time HP UFT, or before even UFT, it was QTP. So QTP was like ruling the market, and I was pretty active at that time. I was like completely just joined like with around 2 years of experience by now by the time, and I was migrating all the scripts from Windrunner to the QTP at that particular time. So I started my career in 2002 with Windrunner. So all the scripts that I developed in Windrunner was migrating to QTP UFT in 2004, and from there onwards, at least I can say around 8 to 9 years, UFT was like king in the market. It was ruling the market. Of course, there were competitors like Microsoft Visual Studio, Rational Suite, but the major market was with the HP UFT. But since 2010, when this second version of it came into work, so after that, what happens is like, since there was not much of work going on, so Google has taken over this 1.0 code, and they started enhancing by putting some of the developers like under the leadership of Seaman Stewart. He's the one who kind of contributing more along with the team. The version of 2.0, which is so popular in the market, has been released in 2010. So even though it's picked up, kind of released into market in 2010, the these people started picking up only from 2012, 2013 onwards. So that's about the history of 1.0 and 2.0. The one that we are going to look at, which is 3.0, which is recently developed, and it's definitely it's the same year of 2017. And just now we have looked at the latest version that we have is 3.7.1. So I can safely go back and update this document as the latest version is 3.7.1. So I'll do it later. So these are the different versions of it: 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. You don't need to really know any of the details. Of course, we're going to use 3.0 is majorly using 2.0, and I just made a note of a couple of things. People who know 2.0, there are a lot of new features that are being added in 3.0, like grid has a lot of stability issues. There were a lot of issues. They got fixed in 3.0, and you have an help coming up in all the grid nodes, and it is being updated to the latest version of HTML unit driver that I just talked about it. There is a good logging in 3.0. And then Firefox, the profile is passed to both legacy Firefox driver and Gecko driver. We will see all of these features as we go. The idea of this session is to kind of get as much as possible the details of entire Selenium suite and the related components, so that you can take a decision whether this is the right tool for me to learn at this point of the time or not. Um, and then there are a couple of old components like remote controller, etc. So they were, there's no longer you need to run them to run 3.0 scripts. So that you will understand only when we look at the Selenium suite of components. So typically, when they develop the first version, they have these components like IDE, Integrated Development Environment, where people can simply record, playback, add simple assertions, conditions, and you can convert that code into Java, C Sharp, Ruby, etc. There was a major drawback of 1.0 why it's not people picked up was they had to run it through something called remote control. So we don't need to really go into those details, but just to give you an idea. So there was a client side component, server side component, and to run a simple Selenium test, you have to integrate these two and then run it. And to do a parallel testing, there was a grid, but it was not so great. It was grid one. Now all these are deprecated now, so you don't need to really worry about all of this. ID is still there, but it has been enhanced a lot in 2.1, 3.0. Now, when it comes to 2.0, they came up with something called Selenium WebDriver. So there was nothing called WebDriver in the previous version, which is 1.0. So WebDriver was introduced in 2.0. And this grid, which is so used in parallel testing. For example, if I have 100 tests to run, I'm going to split into probably 5 different nodes. In each node, I'm going to run 20 different tests, and probably one of them on Firefox browser with maybe Windows operating system with our Internet Explorer. The other one maybe with the Macintosh and Opera. So you can do all kind of combinations and run on the grid parallel testing. So 2.0, this WebDriver is the one that we're going to learn has been introduced in 2.0, which is so popular for giving your interface commands that I have just explained a few minutes back. It will take from your integrated development environment and try to play back on the application. The WebDriver grid, which is again enhanced a lot, and that's called grid 2.0. The first version was grid 1.0, and now it's grid 2.0. So typically, this is a collection of suites. Like you have an IDE, and there was an RC, WebDriver, and a grid. So in Selenium 2, what they have done is this RC has been merged into WebDriver itself. So there is nothing called RC separately. You're going to do it in 2.0. And in 3.0, you still have Selenium IDE. I'll extend this picture a bit. So you still have Selenium IDE, and we'll have WebDriver 3.0, and then we still have Selenium Grid. So in a way, when we get into the detailed discussions, we're going to look at how do we work with Selenium IDE, and then here I'm going to talk about Selenium 3.0, WebDriver, and all its features. And then we're going to look at Grid for parallel testing. So these are the three major components that are part of the suite. So this is just a collection of suites and what is available in the market. And there are a lot of comparisons that people tries to do. As I told you, the competitor one is the HP UFT or QTP, which people tries to do. So let's quickly try to understand what is a major or difference in this. As we have been saying, Selenium is kind of an open source tool. It's free to use, whereas your UFT is a commercial tool. You have to buy the license, pay per annum based on the number of users that you're going to use. Nowadays, even HP UFT is available as software as a service in the cloud, and it has been taken over by from HP to a company called Micro Focus. Now it's all part of the Micro Focus. They still call it as an HP UFT, but Micro Focus is kind of totally focusing on these commercial tools. So they're trying to again come back with a lot of enhancements and with lesser price compared to how it was to give a competition to the Selenium, which is totally open source. So we'll have to wait and see how it goes. But at this point of the time, it's totally Selenium is what ruling the market. You all can know based on the number of job positions that are there in the market, right? So Selenium can support these are the different browsers, i.e. Firefox, as we have been talking about, whereas your UFT can by default support only on IE, but you can also run it on Firefox Chrome if you have extra plugins that requires to be installed. And I've been talked about UFT supports only Windows. It can support any of these operating systems, and these are the different languages in which you can write it, but whereas your UFT can write only in VB script or JavaScript. Selenium can be extendable. Since it's an open source, you can actually take that entire Selenium code. It's available in the GitHub. We can go take that entire code and we can write a wrapper on top of it. We can write a tool on top of it. There are a lot of companies who are doing that. For example, Robot Framework, which we are planning to discuss, part of this course, is also one of the tool which is using Selenium 2.0, and they extended it to something called Robot Framework, which is totally a keyword driven kind of a framework. A keyword driven framework. So it's so easy. You don't need to write any lines of code. Whatever we're going to learn in entire Selenium, you don't need to write any of those lines of code when you go to Robot Framework. But not everybody uses majorly because they wanted to develop the program, or they want to hire the people who can actually uh, develop Selenium scripts, and and continuously maintain it whenever there is a change in the application, etc. So, but it can be extended to make it a very simple framework as well. So that's one aspect of it. And then it can support mobile device testing also, as I was talking about. If you can use Appium library integration, it can support. There is a third-party software available. If you can integrate with HPUFT, then it can support that. This is used only for web-based application. That is the only limitation. Whereas this HPUFT can be used for both Windows applications as well as web applications. Now, since it's an open source tool, so you don't get an official support available in the market. But for the last 5 years, the kind of companies adapted and the kind of help that's available on internet is tremendous. If you get into any issue, just Google it. You will get to see a lot of articles and some sort of samples of code which we can solve our problem. But whereas this is a commercial tool, click of a call, technical team will call you back and they'll try to help you wherever you get support. So that's the kind of a difference that you will see it in the commercial tools versus open source tool. And here, if you just install HP UFT alone, everything by default comes there. But the complexity in Selenium is each and every tool we have to download, we have to integrate. So that is where a lot of people feel it as complex. But I have designed this course in such a way that we'll go step by step, and we'll see how we can. I'll assume you don't know anything about Java language. You don't know about any of these WebDriver 2.0 bindings, and we'll start from a very, very fundamental level. So to get a complete picture of this, what we're going to learn, in the very first session. What we're going to do is we are going to have more detailed introduction to Selenium tool. That's the first thing that I'm going to do in the next one. Then we'll get into different things like we'll work with the Selenium IDE. So we'll look at Selenium IDE. We're going to spend about 3 to 4 sessions. Like we create few tests there, convert into different languages, and then we'll look at a few assertions, etc. But to be frank, this is only to just get familiar with how Selenium can understand your applications, web applications, just to get a basic idea. But you're not going to really work on the same tool for a long time, because in real time this is not going to be used much. But what we're going to do is, whenever you work on any application, first of all your tool has to understand, like typically whatever the web application that you're going to work. For example, this is your web application, right? We generally call it as application under test. Okay, suppose it's called application under test, and this tool can be any tool, be it an HPUFT or your Selenium WebDriver. So typically what they try to do is, be it an HPUFT or a Selenium WebDriver, it will try to, your application will have different controls. Like there can be a text box, there can be a list box, right? There can be a link, and there can be a radio button, a check button, right? There can be a grid or a table. Sometimes we'll have a table, table control or a grid control, and there can be some push buttons. So all these are in the world of Selenium, we call them as locators. In other, probably you call it as objects. That's okay. You can call them as an objects or you can call them as locators. And these locators have different categories. As we said, this is an input kind of a text. This is an input box. So typically it will be categorized as an HTML input tag. And then you have a list box, right? So it's categorized as a list box. And there is a button here, a radio button, and there is a table or a grid here, right? And there is a push button. So they have different categories. And the tool has to understand what is the unique information that your control has. What is the unique information about each of these controls, so that you can utilize that information and write the code in the corresponding tool language, whether it is a WebDriver or a UFT. You can write the program based on the unique information of the control, so that when you play back this program, it will exactly go and play back on the corresponding control only or corresponding locator only. So different tools will use different mechanisms to identify these controls. But fundamentally what we can say, when your developer is developing this form, he will provide certain properties to each of these controls, and the tool will try to see what are the unique information about these properties, and that unique information you have to utilize and write the code. So when it comes to Selenium, there are 8 different ways in which your Selenium will actually identify a control. So we're going to learn all those different ways of, it's actually called locator identification mechanisms. Like typically, it's in a very a good developer can actually provide a unique ID for every single control. Okay, if you have an application, if you have a locator having a unique ID, that is very easy to write an automation program. And the biggest advantage of having an ID is internationalization testing, localization testing becomes easy. For example, the same application is going to go into EN, US, German, Japan, French, etc. The labels are going to change according to the localization, but ID is not going to change. ID is going to be same. So it is always recommended to have controls with ID so that automation can be very easy. So if your application has an ID, then it's very easy to identify with Selenium. We're going to use the ID and then we're going to write it. If you don't have an ID, then we'll look for something called name. And there can be each control or locator can have a name, so we'll try to do that. If not, we'll see what is the class name of that, so you can identify with class name. If not, there is something called tag name. Every locator is identified with some HTML tag name, so we can write with the tag name. In case of a link, you will have the link text, whatever the link that you see it on the application, right? So we'll use link text. For example, if I have to just show here, the link text is something like edit this page, or here it is like source code, Maven information. So we'll have a link text. Sometimes if the link text is so big, then you're going to use partial link text, which is like part of, instead of using the complete link text, which is very lengthy, so you can actually go with only part of it, which is partial link text. And then if any of these things are not going to help, if suppose there is no ID, there is no name, class name, tag name, link text, partial link text, there is a very popular and definitely works out for each locator is called XPath, which is basically a kind of a mathematical expression or XML kind of an expression that we're going to write. So we'll see in detail. We're going to spend about 190 minutes full session on XPath, writing different examples of an XPath. How do we do it? If not, there is something called a CSS selector. So nowadays, the latest technology of developing the web applications is, apart from HTML, we have something called cascade style sheet. So if your applications are using any of these cascading style sheet, then we can use CSS selector also to write the program to identify. So we look at the different mechanisms how locator can be identified when we actually start getting into the details. So then there are, to identify these properties, like I told you, each control or locator will have a different properties. So how can I know those properties? In case of Firefox, there is a tool called Firebug that you can install. In case of Internet Explorer, there is something called IE developer tools. See, actually, what you can do on any control, right? For example, I'm here. If I have to understand how this text box gets identified, you can just do a right click and do something called inspect, and that is going to tell you what are the different properties of it. It's going to tell you it's basically an HTML input box, and it belongs to a type text field, and it has an ID property called Q, name property called Q, and its size is 30 pixels. So like this, every single control will have certain properties, and these are the properties that I'm talking about. So these are the properties of a form, these are the properties of a label, these are the properties of an input box. So the challenge is, if we know all these properties, and wherever this ID is there, the problem is very simple. But wherever ID is not there, then we'll have to look at other mechanisms to even once we understand full-fledged way of writing XPath and everything. There are some tools also, like you can just do an XPath checker tool, etc. Which so only to get through the interviews and to practice yourself, we'll be writing XPath on our own. But once we get into the real work, there are some tools available on each of those browsers. Firefox has its own browser, Chrome has its own XPath checker tool. Just click of a button, you'll get the XPath. All you need to do is copy and put it into your program. It's going to work. So we look at some of those small tools, how it's going to help all that. So then we will get into the WebDriver basics. We're going to learn different WebDriver basics, like how do we install the Java. Most of you might not have Java on your machine, so we'll start from a very fundamental level of from where can we download the Java, how can we download and install the Java, and then how can we set it in your system variables as a Java home and class path. So we'll see that, and then we can install the Eclipse IDE. So this is where we are going to write our program. So from where can we download, and how can we start working with Eclipse IDE, and then we'll write a simple Java program first. Then we'll download these WebDriver server and Java bindings, like from this particular website. So let me just, like I can show you, this is the server binding, and here are the Java bindings that we're going to download. We're going to download all these things and add it to our program. So to do that, so Java bindings and configure with Eclipse. So that now your Eclipse will be fully ready to understand WebDriver interface commands. So we'll do that prep and then we'll start writing those programs. So then we'll look at for tests on different browsers. As we can see, we'll start with Firefox, but we'll see how can we do it for different browsers. A couple of examples to understand where the differences will be and all that. Then the biggest advantage we're going to do it is we are going to look at the tests on different browsers. Like I told you, different locators. We have different locators that are going to be available, like input box that we have just seen there. How do we work with an input box? How do we work with a list box? How do we work with a button? And there are different operations each of these locators will have. You cannot have same code applicable for all the different. For example, if it is an input box, I may be entering a value there, I may be retrieving the value from there, I may be checking whether it is accepting a multi-text, etc., etc. But when I go to list box, the story will be totally different. How can I select the value from a list box? How can I compare whether my list is having the sufficient values or not, whether a particular item is present in the list box or not. So checking all those things, we're going to do it there. And button, you may be clicking on it, you may be double clicking on it. And same case when you actually go into a table kind of thing, it's totally different. Table is again a collection of rows and columns. So how can you check a particular value is present in the table or not? So those kind of operations. When it comes to checkbox, it's slightly different. When it comes to your web button, it's going to be different, right? And when we have links, how we are going to work. When we have images, how we are going to work. When we have frames, like just now we have seen there is a frame. If you have a frame, how we are going to work. So the biggest advantage is learning on different controls. What kind of methods the WebDriver interface will have? How do we work with all these things? So that's going to be a major learning part of it in the basics of WebDriver. And then there are various predefined WebDriver methods that we're going to look at for different controls or different locators. So that's what we're going to look at. Once we have these fundamentals, we're going to integrate this test with a JUnit so that we can understand how a unit testing can be performed in Java, how unit testing performed in Java. Though it's actually a responsibility of the development team, but some people in Selenium can use JUnit. So we'll just look at how can we download the JUnit jar file, how can we add it to our test, and what kind of annotations it supports, etc. So then we'll get into the advanced WebDriver. So once we have fundamentals of WebDriver, then we're going to go into advanced, and in advanced we're going to look at TestNG framework, which is popular and a lot of people uses TestNG framework. This is basically system testing. It's not for unit testing. It's for the system testing or functional testing. And there are different annotations that it's going to write, like, @test, @before test, @after test. There are almost 8 to 9 annotations we have. So we're going to look at all those annotations. How do we work with the biggest advantage of this TestNG framework is it's going to be a XML based framework, and the reportings will be very by default generated in HTML or JSON format, that whatever you want, and it's very colorful, and you can actually have a lot of information which you can directly pass it to your clients. So you don't need to do any reporting, you don't need to do any extra work to generate those reports, whether your test cases are pass or fail, etc. And creation of your test suite is going to happen through a simple XML file that we're going to look at. So after that, we're going to see how we can do even creating a data-driven test using TestNG. So within the TestNG, we can pass parameters, and then we can do that. So we'll also see how do we work with alerts, pop-ups when it comes to the tests. Like, in web applications, it's so common when you're running your tests, suddenly some dialog box will pop up, some advertisement will pop up. So how can we actually take care of those alerts, etc. Then we'll see how can we work with Excel files, basically your Excel files and sheets using Apache POI jar files. So Apache is an organization which has developed these POI jar files, which you can actually use it for working with your entire MS Office suite like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. So we'll see how can we work with these jar files and how can we do the data-driven tests. So after that, again, we will create a data-driven test or a data-driven framework, rather, a framework using these Apache POI jar files. And then we can also look at how do we actually develop a keyword-driven framework. So what is keyword-driven framework? How can we develop keyword-driven framework so that the actual QA people. So we're going to look at more like a Selenium developer, not like a fundamental automation test engineer. So we'll train in such a way that you will be able to develop a framework. not like a normal other QA who will consume the framework and just add the test steps or test cases. So we'll see how can we do that. Keyword driven framework. We'll also look at how can we do the hybrid framework out of this. How can we do database testing, like using JDBC? How can we do database testing? Because if you just do only from the UI, the functional testing won't be sufficient. You have to connect to database and check it in the corresponding tables whether the data has been inserted into the right set of tables or not. So you have to do that. And then we'll see how do we work with Selenium Grid. So I was talking about this is for parallel testing. Like I told you, if you have 100 tests to run and you're going to split them into different nodes. So we're going to see how we actually work with different nodes and execution on different OS and browser combinations. So suppose your product is going to go in different browsers, different operating systems, testing all the combinations, it's not so easy. So that's where the grid is going to help. We'll split our test cases into different nodes and we're going to run them. After that, there is another very famous framework people use called page object model. So we'll see how do we actually create a page object model. And then there is a tool called log4j. It's very famous in use for logging in Java. Whenever you write any Java program, most of the people use log4j for logging. So we'll look at that. So if you ask me from a Selenium point of view, this is what we're going to learn majorly. The initial IDE tool, and then we'll get into WebDriver basics, and then we'll get into advanced. But this is not sufficient, to be frank. In today's world where people are talking about a DevOps model, people are talking about SDET kind of a role, software development engineer and test kind of a role, apart from the normal QA. So what you should be majorly looking at is these CI/CD tools. Also, you should be definitely be familiar. So what we're going to learn in this CI/CD tools, as I talked about, we'll first look at this central version control system called Git, and we'll see what is the difference between Git and GitHub, and how can we actually maintain the code centrally in a version control system. We'll look at that. That's one thing that we're going to look at. Then we'll see the Apache Maven tool, which is for build and it's basically for build management. So this is where your developers, testers, everybody is going to maintain the code as a Maven project, so that whenever we download, because in the world of Java, there are a lot of jar files we are going to work, Java runtime files, and they go into different versions every day. Probably if I pick it up today, let's say one of the jar file is 6.5 version. Maybe if I check it 2 weeks down the line, there will be a next version of available. So how can we manage all these jar files? We can actually do it very easily with the help of Apache Maven. So whenever the latest version is available, it will automatically pick it up and make it available for you. And then we are going to look at the Jenkins tool for scheduling automation tests to run on a daily basis, daily or weekly basis, based on your company um, requirement. So some companies will run it almost every day, and some companies run it on a weekly basis. So we'll do that. And then I'll talk about what is test-driven development, acceptance-driven development, behavior-driven development, and then we'll look at one of the tool called Cucumber, which is a famous ATDD or BDD tool, basically. So we'll look at how can we work with Cucumber, with Java, with the Selenium that we have learned. We'll put together. And then finally, I'm going to show you on what is this robot framework and how they have extended Selenium 2.0 libraries and how they have actually developed this framework. So this is a whole suite of things that we're going to learn. and part of it we're going to definitely look at a real working application, so that you can learn practically more on the application, and you can get to identify some bugs as part of your learning, and we can ensure that gets fixed along with the team that I have. So these are the typical different things that we're going to learn. As I told you, it's about the Selenium suite, GitHub, Maven, Jenkins, Cucumber, and all these things. And of course, we're going to practice a lot of examples, a lot of work, kind of work will be given to you to practice at home. So that way it will be very, by the way, end of these, I'm looking at all these sessions would require a good 45 sessions of each 60 to 70 minutes of learning here, and then you need to spend at least 2 to 3 hours of practice, because when we actually talk about all the Java code and the tool, etc., things might look simple, but when you start working it, you will be actually really be facing the problem. So unlike others probably, so I will be sharing with my email ID. If required, I'll be sharing my contact, so we can have a dedicated one-on-one help if you get into any issues, so if you face any issues. So that's one thing that we can resolve, and we can talk about job requirements. So I have my LinkedIn account with almost 9,000 connections currently, which includes lots of QA and the HR folks. I'm more like acting as a bridge between the kind of job openings that are there and the people that they are trying to fill it. So I can bridge that gap and see if I can help you to find out your own location. I have HR contacts from India, US, UK, Australia, and same way a lot of QAs and all these different places. So that's one up. And even post job, it's very difficult right now. It's very difficult for the manual testing. To be frank, all these my 9K connections, I'm at least getting 30, 40 requests on a daily basis saying I'm looking for a job. Okay, which may be looking like sounding a little less number, but I'm going to see it's going to increase very soon. And when I look at all those 30, 40 connections on a daily basis, why they're looking out for a change, and it's very unfortunate that most of them are on a manual testing. So right now they are actually working on manual testing. They don't have any automation knowledge. So that is something that's going to be very unfortunate, and you can expect to see of such things going to happen more and more going forward. So it is, if you just say I'm only a QA and I can do a manual testing, it's very difficult time at this point of the time. So you need good. See, for example, if somebody wants to hire, they want to hire who knows automation as well, right? So why just want to hire only manual testing? Because if at least where there is a repetition of the testing that you're going to do, you will automate it and save some man hours to the organization. That's the whole point of it. And when they think of an automation, it's people are thinking Selenium at this point of the time, because it's open source, a lot of help is available, can support your web technology. So that's the reason a lot of startups, middle and even high-end product-based companies are actually using this. So when you come back with a manual testing background, when you learn the course, and when you get a job, even on the job, you may be really required some sort of an assistant. So I'll be happy to help you when you even get a job, if you get into really face any issues. So I'm happy to help again one-on-one. The first 3 months are going to be kind of critical for you, but once you start working on the things, it'll be very easy. So that's all. I'm kind of looking at it. So this is the overall details. If you want any further details, you can always reach out to me. It's Shankar, S3softglobal at gmail.com. So right now the website is completely under renovation. We are trying to revamp the website. So soon I'm going to share the latest website and the corresponding official email and everything. So we're trying to even come up, apart from the learning part of it, right now we're getting into application development, testing services. So soon I'm going to come back with the latest website that we have. and the official email IDs. For now, this is the email ID that you can reach out to me, SHANKER S3softglobal@gmail.com. All right, so that's all for now for the orientation. So I'll be sending out the latest updates. The next session that I'm looking at is just day after tomorrow, not immediately tomorrow, so that people get some time and to think about uh, what can be the best to learn. So I would like to give the time, and then we'll be having the next session starting from day after tomorrow. All right. So anyone has any questions, you can just put it in the chat if you have. Like, we'll take quick 5 minutes. I know we are on time, but I can spend 5 minutes more to see if you have any questions. You can always reach out to me on this email ID post. That's not a problem. So will you be sharing the Word documents that you have showed? Absolutely. So the way we are going to do is we are going to majorly work with the Google Drive. So I'll be sharing all the documents on the Google Drive. And even the videos. What we are going to do is these videos access will be given to you for a lifetime, and you can actually watch them, but you cannot really download them, or you cannot share with anybody. Okay, you can only watch them. So video access also will be given to you for a lifetime. Even if you want to download, you cannot really download. And whenever anybody tries to do that, I'll get a notification. So we can take care of that. But for you, whoever gets subscribed, you will have an access for lifelong. So you can always go back, refer to the sessions whenever you wanted to repeat it again, learn it on your own. If you still have questions, you'll be able to reach out to me. Yes, so all the documents, all the examples that we discuss in the class, and there's a lot of, I can actually show immediately. So it's already there. It's not something that new for me. So a lot of documents already available, should be in my downloads. So these are the WebDriver classwork, introductions, and then these are WebDriver total programs that we're going to discuss. So, and then data-driven framework, TestNG framework, advanced WebDriver. So in fact, these are the documents that I'm going to share with you with the enhanced examples that we discuss. All right, any other questions? Is the class happen every day? Yes, it's from Monday to Friday, same time that I'm looking at it, which is 7 a.m. PST. So timing is going to be kind of 7 a.m. PST. It's from Monday to Friday. And I'm looking at like full-fledged 40 to 45 sessions. Okay, if you don't know, manual testing should be, this is all you need to know is few things. What is a test case? So that when we actually start automating them, we'll be using these words. Okay, so all you need to know is a test case. So I can share you some documents on how to write test cases. If you know that, that should be fine, Ben. So ideally, this is not something like a prerequisite to do automation. If you know, it's actually kind of easy, but you can start learning parallelly, or just have a basic idea of how to write test scenarios, test cases. You should be good. All right. Anyone has any other questions? So live project is something that we have a couple of applications that are going to come very soon for the development. We'll be looking at them, but for now we can just pick up any web application from a learning perspective, and we can learn. But soon you can expect some applications from my side. All right. Great. So thank you all for joining. So have a great day or evening or night wherever you are from, different parts of the world. Talk to you soon. So wait for the people who are interested. Just drop an email, and then we'll be replying back with the details. Thank you.